All right, got some folks joining us. Let me share my screen really quick, get our startup screen here.
Wonderful.
All right, everybody seeing the welcome slide?
Oh yeah, looks beautiful as always, Jen. As
Cool.
always.
It's the same slide, so I haven't managed to mess it up. It looks pretty good, and it's got all of the information for all of you folks that are joining us this afternoon. As always, welcome to Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jenn Harrman, with the Zero Waste team here at Metro Water Services, talking all things waste with you. And I'm here with Christina Langone with Urban Green Lab. And we are going to be talking about sustainable land management today and how sheep are mowing some lawns here in Nashville. So it's going to be a very exciting episode.
Very
exciting. We'll give everybody just another minute to hop in to our program, and we'll talk a little bit about the chat. So we do utilize the chat for our program today, as always. So check out that chat feature, that little bubble in your Zoom controls. You can use that to ask questions to our panelists. So our panelists will have a nice conversation and show some videos today, and then you're going to be able to ask some questions. And Christina will be in the chat rolling through those, and we'll get those asked to our guest at the end of the presentation, as always. So don't forget to use that chat function. And and always click everyone, so everyone can see what you're sending, so that you're not just sending stuff to me and Christina. We want to hear what you want to say, but we also want to make sure everybody else is involved in the conversation as well. So make sure you're chatting with everyone and not just the two of us.
Yes, it ends up making me look a little less silly too, because I usually respond like, "Thanks, Catherine," and then no one else saw the question, and it looks like I'm just talking to my mom, whose name is Catherine, I guess. But yeah, we have a fantastic show today. I am very, very excited. We were already cracking up, telling jokes, having a good time, talking about alligators. I mean, there's been so much behind the scenes camaraderie and community that you guys are in for a fantastic episode today. I can't wait.
Oh, it's gonna be so good. So good. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing. I think we probably are pretty good here with our guests. Well, stop sharing all of that, and I think we're ready to get started. Christina, sounds good?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay, so to get started today, everybody, I want to welcome our very special guest, Zach Richardson, who is the owner of the Nashville Chew Crew. He is going to be sharing with us today all about what he does in terms of sustainable land management and how he uses sheep to do that, and some dogs as well. So first off, today we're going to show a little video that'll kind of get you oriented to his business, what he does, and his coworkers, and then we'll jump into some Q&A as always. And as you ask questions, don't forget to ask those in our chat. So let me pull up our video here, make sure I've got the right one. Make sure I'm sharing sound. Christina, yell at me if you can't hear the sound as I share here. All right. So that gives you a little quick introduction to Zach, but why don't you give an introduction to yourself? Tell us a little bit more about yourself, what drew you to your work with targeted grazing, as well as how you got your start.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jen and Christina. It's a blast from the past watching that video. That was a long time ago. I think that said there were 60 sheep when I moved back, and now there's like 360 sheep. So, but to go way back, I studied landscape architecture. I was from Nashville originally. Went to University of Georgia to study landscape architecture. And somewhere, with some friends, we decided we needed to clear out a backyard. And so I got on Craigslist and I bought 3 goats. I put them in the back of my Jeep Cherokee, and I drove back, and I made it somehow. I weaseled it into part of my curriculum to write about it and study it, how it brought people to the site. And sure enough, it was awesome. It blew up. That was the most popular backyard on campus. Those 3 goats were famous, and it transformed the backyard. From there, I realized it was something that I should study a little bit more, and got a campus sustainability grant to do the same thing, but on campus, right in the heart of University of Georgia's campus. And that was as you can imagine, a huge success. Everybody loved it. So much so that they asked me to come back to grad school and pursue it, continue it, write a thesis about it. And so I said, yes, of course. And at the same time, found a gentleman in Atlanta that had a business similar to mine now. So when I wasn't in school doing hands-on activities on campus, I was learning from this incredible dog trainer, dog breeder, and sheep herder. And throughout grad school, and then thereafter, once I graduated grad school, and once I had soaked up enough knowledge from him and learned how to run sheep all over the city, I traded my first paycheck for my border collie, and then bought all of the animals I moved up to Nashville with. And here we are today, 5 or 6 years later, talking to a computer about sheep. So yeah, it's crazy.
That's incredible. So the video gave us and gave our audience kind of an idea about what you do, but can you talk more about what actually is targeted grazing and why someone would choose targeted grazing over other alternatives? So what are those alternatives and why would you choose this option instead?
Yeah, good question. So targeted grazing is essentially the strategic placement of sheep on a piece of property for a certain amount of time to achieve a specific landscape management goal. Typically, these sites that we go to are sites that no one else can go to, whether it's too steep, inaccessible because it's too overgrown, too urban, too wet, whatever the situation, we're going places that no one else can go. So they're hard to manage, difficult to reach landscapes. And so what we do is, with whatever landowner or land manager we're working with, we'll define an area that we're targeting, usually with invasive species. Around here, it's privet, honeysuckle, English ivy, kudzu in some places, stuff like that. That's where we enclose the sheep within an electric netting, and we leave them there overnight for as many days as it takes, depending on how large the site and how many sheep are present, to achieve that goal. And then we move them to the new site, whether it be on the same property or, load them up on the trailer and we head to the next one. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We also leave livestock guardian dogs with the sheep, overnight to make sure they're safe. And then with me is the border collie you saw in the video, in case they need to be moved from site to site or from site to a trailer. Anytime the sheep need to be moved, that's where the border collie comes in. And the livestock guardian dogs you can think of as like 24-hour security guards, like their Secret Service. They stay with them all the time.
I think this might be a good opportunity to share. We've got a video of Dougie, who is doing his work. So maybe I can show that video and you can talk a little bit more about him and how all of that works, if that sounds good. So I'm going to share my screen again. There's going to be a really funny cat that you're all going to see as part of this as we get going. Isn't that cat adorable? Okay, hold on. I didn't share the sound. I knew I was going to do that. Bear with me, y'all. It's not like I've done this a million times. Okay, here we go.
Replay.
The
Yeah,
music in that is perfect. It's incredible to watch, though. Just, just how he works. It's so amazing.
it is. And I alluded to it in that video you saw at the beginning, but I would literally set everything I own on fire before I got rid of that dog. He is that important. I could not do without him. He's the rock star of this business, and I just drive the bus. He is invaluable. But what you could see me doing in that video is, well, you may not have been able to hear me, but you could see Dougie working around the sheep, either clockwise or counterclockwise. And so it's he and I have an understanding and a relationship to where, with either words or whistles, if you think about the sheep as a clock, if I send him clockwise around it, that's got a whistle. It's either the command is come by, or, and then if I want him to go counterclockwise around the sheep, he's got a command that's away to me or away, and I say, and that'll make him go around that way. And once he gets in balance, so me, sheep, Dougie, he should stop. And he's got a whistle there, which is just lie down, or one shrill whistle. I realize I shouldn't whistle into this. That was probably stupid of me to like blow all your ears up.
You're good.
You get the idea. I'll just use vocal commands. And his lie down. And then if I say walk up, he'll walk up and bring the sheep right to me. And he even uses my intensity of my voice. If I say walk up, walk up, walk up, walk up, he'll walk quickly. But if I just say walk up, he'll just take 1 or 2 steps, and he'll do it slowly and steadily, just ease him through. So you can imagine he is so important every day just to get the sheep where they need to be. But also, if something were to happen, God forbid, maybe the sheep get out, or maybe, a dog gets in and is chasing the sheep, and whatever the situation, we need to be able to get those sheep in a safe place quickly. And the only way to do that is with a border collie, a herding dog that's as good as Dougie. And I'm not saying Dougie is he's great for me. He's great with me, but believe me, there are other people that make me and Dougie look like chumps, in Scotland and England, that just, their dogs look really, really good compared to, but we're not trying to be trial dogs. We're trying to be work dogs. So that's all that matters. Getting the job done.
That's incredible. I saw somebody in the chat. They want to hear the whistles. So you're okay on the whistles.
So I can do it again. I'll put it away from my
yeah.
mouth a little bit. Okay. So if it's clockwise, that's come by. If it's counterclockwise, it's away to me, which is away, and once he gets where I need him to be, I want him to lie down, it's lie down, and then walk up is walk up, and then again, if I do, he'll walk quickly, but if I just do, he'll take just like 1 or 2 tiny steps. So I hope that didn't blow your speakers out, but
no.
Okay, good. Yeah, so, and what's fascinating too, I don't want to get too much on the dogs. We could talk about dogs all day, but whereas Dougie is rides with me in the truck every day. He's literally in the parking lot right now waiting on me. He's ready to go to work. The livestock guardian dogs stay with the sheep. So Dougie is present 24/7 with me. He's micromanaged. He's got a command for everything. The guard dogs are very much the opposite. With them, it's they're born with the flock, and they never leave the flock because they are bonded with that group of animals. I don't want them to be bonded to me or any other human. I want them to respect me and know that I'm the shepherd, but they need to know that their job is to protect the sheep. And so they were bred to do this over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so the training process, whereas Dougie is much more intensive, with the guard dogs, it's less is more. You just got to let their innate traits just manifest themselves, and they will. And believe me, those dogs are just as cool as Dougie is in his own regard. The livestock guardian dogs, I'd give $1 million to know how they go about 24 hours a day and deal with all the sounds and all the distractions, but still stay with their sheep and protect their flock. It's pretty remarkable. For example, in lambing time, when we've got hundreds of female sheep or ewes, and they're all over a field giving birth to 1 or 2 lambs, the guard dogs will stay. let's say one mother is away from the flock. They typically kind of stray off by themselves to give birth. One guard dog will stay with them, with that mother and the newborns, while the other guard dogs will like usher the rest of the flock back to safety and stay with them. So I didn't teach them that, and it's just that's just what they do. And it's, whereas Dougie is important, they're just as important, because everybody on the team has a job at the Chew Crew. The sheep, the guard dogs, the herding dogs, the bipeds, we've all got a job.
Gosh, it's just incredible. So we've talked about the dogs. So let's go to the sheep, because I know we've had the question. Actually, somebody asked us before the presentation a couple days ago, got an email. We're very curious about, why sheep, why not goats? You also talked about there being goats originally. But I also know that you have a unique type of sheep in that they are often mistaken as goats. So can you talk a little bit more about your flock? I know you said you now have you have more than 60. You have 300, closer to 360, you said?
Yeah, and they're all pregnant. So next spring is so I did start out with goats. That was just because I had, no idea between goats or sheep. The gentleman I worked for after college only used sheep. And I very quickly, while I owned goats, realized why. Goats are like little Houdinis. It's like trying to fence in water. They're incredible at getting out of whatever enclosure you want them to be in, versus sheep, which are much more content to stay put. They're very flock oriented, which makes them want to stay in their enclosure, and also easier to work with a herding dog. Not that you can't with goats, but it's much easier with sheep. Goats typically have horns. Sheep can have horns, but I only have sheep that are polled, Polled, which means no horns. Oops, sorry, just knocked my horns. Those horns can, well, for one thing, if you got a mean goat or a mean ram, it's going to hurt more when he hits you if you're not looking the right way. But it's also something that can get stuck in a fence, and I use electric fencing. So if those horns get stuck in the fence and then the goat pulls, either way, horns are not good in what I do. So again, sheep are better in that regard. So back to sheep. So I use sheep for all those reasons, but specifically I use hair sheep. So there's your like archetypal European wool sheep, big fluffy wool sheep that is sheared every year. That's not what I use. This is a hair sheep, which was bred in a more temperate climate. And so it puts on a winter coat, but it sheds naturally in the summertime. So it's easy on the animal in our mild winters, and it's even easier on the animals in our relatively hot summers. So they have less wool or no wool. It's also easier on me. I don't have to shear them every year. When I say they're bred in temperate climates, the breeds I use mainly is Katahdin. You might recognize that name from Mount Katahdin in Maine. I think it's the end of the Appalachian Trail, but there's a gentleman up there somewhere that developed this breed 70s or 80s or 60s, a few generations back. And that's kind of like a go-to parasite resistant, hardy, bred for meat typically, although I don't, I joke they make more money eating than being eaten. So they're not meat animals for me, but that's typically what this breed would be. Another couple examples are St. Croix, Dorper, Florida native, Barbados, black belly. There's a couple other like North American, Caribbean breeds of this kind of sheep that are applicable in our region. But yeah, that's a really long answer to hair sheep versus wool sheep. Talking to a computer is tough. There's no one here to tell me to shut up. So
no, this is perfect. It's all excellent information, very interesting, especially because I know, just having known you from previously, there's so many people that mistake them for goats, and it's just such a unique thing. People don't see them as sheep, but they are sheep, even though they're just a different kind.
Yeah, and I don't correct anybody anymore. I just say thank you. Well, I'm glad you love the goats. But if you're ever driving by, goat tails are usually up, sheep tails are usually down. It's an easy way to tell hair sheep from goat. So,
Oh,
nah, little cheat. Yeah, little tip.
fascinating. So let's flip a little bit and talk about sustainability and what the environmental benefits are of managed grazing, of this targeted grazing versus that traditional maintenance. What really are those sustainability benefits and environmental benefits?
Sure. Yeah. So, we touched on it earlier about it's tough to reach these areas that I'm typically going to. So, a lot of times it'd be intrusive. It'd be so heavy-handed to have to bring in machinery to where it's not an option. It's either unsafe for the operator or it's unsafe for the landscape in terms of churning up topsoil and making erosion. Um, that's one thought. Um, Herbicides are another like option, and I'm not saying herbicides shouldn't exist. I think it's a tool in the toolbox, but in terms of sustainability, I don't think we should be spraying everything. So instead of spraying, cutting and spraying, broadcast spraying, these sheep can go into a lot of those hard areas or even harder areas and accomplish the same thing, defoliate everything from the ground up to about 5 feet, 5.5, 6 feet. Um, so not using those, obviously there's the emissions. The only emissions that we use are to either transport the sheep or to simply, weed eat a path to put up our electric fencing. Um, and if we're going to talk about sustainability, you got to talk about, the the environmental side, sure. And there's other parts of that too. We're fertilizing as we go. There's, less noise pollution, all those things. The economics of it are important. If they're hard to reach places, that's where we can go. I can't compete with someone on a zero turn mower or a bush hog because they can do it cheaper than I can. But only places that are tough to manage, that's where sheep can go and make it cost affordable to clients that need it to happen. But even perhaps more importantly is the social side of it. And that's what fires me up the most, because I don't care if they call them goats or if they call them sheep or if they call them cows. As long as people are engaging with the animals, if you're walking along a greenway and instead of hearing, loud weed eaters and lawnmowers or seeing a crew spraying herbicides, you're stopping and watching 200 sheep and lambs eat. That little moment right there, I see it every day. That means I'm doing my job or the sheep are doing their job. And that might do something it might be a catalyst for the kid in the stroller or the kid on the bike or the guy off work or whatever, to stop and watch birds or to take a minute and look, for crawdads in the creek, or to just re-engage with outside. Because I'm saying this talking to a computer. I don't usually talk to computers, I'm usually outside, but I realize we're battling that, like most people are consumed with being inside and instant gratification. But if we can, in small moments, just get people re-engaged with nature in any capacity, that's a benefit of the sheep. And I hope that they're ambassadors for that. I really do. That part of the social side of the sustainability is something that's intangible and you can't put a dollar sign on it. But to me, it's perhaps the most important of the whole package.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. It's, one of those things I've talked with teachers a lot, and they talk about having kids actually get outside the classroom and engage with their environment. If you don't engage or not in that space or don't care about it, and you are in front of a TV screen all day, then you aren't going to care about all the sustainability and environmental, needs that we really that are so important. So it's great that, you're able to utilize your business in this way to also meet that piece and yeah, really bring people in on that social piece, because it's incredibly important.
It is. And again, like it's not me, it's the sheep and the dogs. They're the rock stars. I'm just driving the bus. But
Yeah.
if it means, doing demonstrations or, herding sheep for, a group, or bringing in volunteers on like a weed wrangle type event, using the sheep to get more people to come to a site to volunteer, I'm all for it. Whatever, however those sheep can help get people involved, it's a good thing.
Absolutely. Can you talk about what sites your flock, well, I guess your flock, you said you're lambing right now, but are there sites that you have? I know you have a Metro Water Services site, but can you talk about some of the sites your sheep are regularly on and where people can engage with them when they are out doing their job and doing their work?
Yeah. There's the Metro Water site that Jen is referring to is the Cumberland River Greenway along the Metro Center area of Nashville, North Nashville. It's a 3-mile stretch from the Clarksville Pike Bridge in Bordeaux to the I-65 bridge close to Germantown. And it's a 3-mile stretch of steep, rocky terrain going from the Greenway down all the way to the river. And the sheep are doing that now 3 times in a growing season. So from late March, early April, all the way until about Thanksgiving, we're going up and down that site back and forth. That's a great one to come visit the sheep at, because it's 5 years ago, that place was a jungle, and now it looks pretty spectacular. You can see the water's edge the whole way. You can take your kids, go fishing, watch birds. It's awesome, and an easy bike ride and walk too. Fort Negley is another great one. This upcoming year, it looks like we'll be there again 3 times or all year, from the whole growing season, April until November, doing 3 passes, hopefully, around the old fort. So the old rock structures that are difficult to manage for, typical crews with weed eaters and mowers, etc. That's an incredible site too, because it's a Civil War, fort on top of a hill, and you're looking out over the top of Nashville. It's beautiful. That's a great site. The sheep are right now, there's some sheep currently at a cool property in Bellevue called the Bell Forest Cave property. It's owned by 10 Green. Underutilized site, but very cool and open to the public. Worth checking out. Again, Bell Forest Cave property. But really, those 2 sites I mentioned first, because the sheep are doing so well, Metro's asked us to keep doing more and more, expand the scope and frequency. So whereas we started out kind of hustling, doing smaller gigs, more residential or smaller commercial, now kind of pivoting toward these larger, longer term management jobs with Metro Water and Metro Parks. Not to say we won't continue to do more in the future, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at in the city right now.
That's great. And those are definitely really difficult sites, as you talked about, being in those areas that are super difficult for those other traditional methods. But yeah, if y'all haven't been out to Fort Negley when they're out there, it's such a cool scene to be up and see the whole Nashville skyline, and then see all the sheep hanging out while you're wandering around looking and learning about Fort Negley. It's just a really cool site. So I think you've talked okay, we've got that question down. Yes, I think you've talked about this one as well. Oh, so how does your work contribute to the conservation? You've talked a little bit about the native plants and the invasives. Can you talk more about how your work contributes to the conservation of native plants as well as native wildlife?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, well, I don't say typically, but there, in a lot of cases, people will bring us onto sites that have been unmanaged for many, many years prior. And so the main vegetation on site is invasive, right? So again, privet, honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, euonymus, tree of heaven, yada, 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 all the things that we hate in Middle Tennessee. That's where we get called to go into, places no one else wants to go into. And that's why they are like they are now. Typically, those are just all invasives, very, very little native remnant vegetation. So we bill ourselves in those situations as a fantastic first step to get you back to square one, right? So back to where you can either take a next step or bring sheep back again to maintain it. However, once you do such a good job, like with sheep or following up the sheep, so like let's say you have a big backyard overgrown, you bring in sheep, you clear it out, you can see everything, and then you come in and let's say you cut everything or use a weed wrench or cut and paint with herbicides, whatever you do, all of a sudden you went from jungle to blank slate, looks great. Then, you could either choose to manage with the sheep or you could just leave it alone. Once we get to that point, it's delicate because in the springtime, you're going to have a lot of spring ephemerals, spring flowers, trilliums, things that you want, but you don't want the sheep to eat, but there still might be some competition from the natives or invasives coming up. In those situations, we would time it to where those native spring ephemerals have already done their thing and then bring in the sheep. The flip side could be said for the fall, like whereas most native deciduous plants will have dropped their leaves shortly after the first frost, we've still got honeysuckle, privet, and Japanese honeysuckle, and euonymus and English ivy present. So we can easily target those species in the later part of the year. The sites that we're on at Fort Negley, those are just so overgrown with invasive species, even at a low height, that the sheep are still managing them time after time and keeping them suppressed. So there's different strategies for different landscapes. So there's no like one solution fits all. So, depending on the site, you'd have to look at what you have present and the best way to manage it. And then, oftentimes I would tell a client, maybe sheep aren't appropriate this time of year, or here's another solution for this time of year. And then we can bring in sheep as a follow-up next growing season, or something like that. So there's all sorts of ways to use sheep as a tool in the toolbox of managing for natives and invasives.
That's great. All right, so we've kind of burned through a lot of our questions that we have on our end. Before we jump into our audience questions, I know I've seen a lot of popping up coming in from the chat, so I think we've probably got a lot of questions in there, but is there anything else that we haven't talked about, that we haven't touched on, that you want to talk about? Oh, and do you have any tips for sustainable land management for those of us with lawns but are not able to hire your flock for every need?
Again, if you've just got a lawn, I'm not your guy, because there's a lot of other ways to manage a small piece of property that's just a lawn. But I'll rephrase that to say, if you have an overgrown, kind of intimidating back 40 space or back margin of your property that is that looks like something you wouldn't even want to walk into, my suggestion is just to go for it. Just start chipping away at it and stay on top of it. Don't be afraid to start. You've got to start somewhere, right? So get out there, break a sweat, make a bonfire, even if it's once a week, once a month. Start and also reach out to people that can help you, even if they can't help you manually. They can help you information wise. They can tell you, what time of year is best. If you're into herbicides, they can tell you what herbicide to use, how, and the best way to use it. They can tell you the best tools to move it mechanically. Don't be afraid to get after it and reach out to people that can help. Those are my two pieces of advice.
Excellent. All right, Christina, I am going to turn it over to you for our questions from the audience.
Fantastic. Wonderful. That was really lovely to listen to. And we had some really wonderful questions come in. So let's get to them. So I'm going to ask you, so anybody who was here from the beginning, don't leave. We're going to get to new information, but I just want to hear from you really quickly for the few folks who are asking some of the questions that you hit in the beginning. So if you don't mind, can you just tell us, let me get the actual question. How did you get started doing this particular niche and incredibly interesting work? I wanted to quote it because it was a nice way of wording it. And then also, can you just talk really quickly about, did you specifically train Dougie?
Great question. Yeah. So I'll wrap those both in the same one. I studied this in college, or I studied landscape architecture and then weaseled my way into making this part of my curriculum through a grant. And then after academia, I found a gentleman in Atlanta that was doing a service similar to what I do here in Nashville. It was called Universally Green, EWE, Universally Green, sheep pun. And that guy was a whiz with working dogs. So I knew and up until meeting him, I had never owned a border collie or a guard dog. So I knew I had to learn from him. His name is Brian Cash. Very quickly I traded my first paycheck for Dougie. So I was in, slippery slope began. And then after college, I went and worked for him for several years in Atlanta, under his apprenticeship, you could say, both with, the herding and the dog training. I will never admit to being as good of a dog trainer as he is. I never will be. I'm not a dog trainer. I know just enough to get me in trouble. So I think that answers your question. So after soaking up enough knowledge from Brian and buying Dougie, I purchased a bunch of sheep and some guard dogs from Brian and moved up to Nashville and started Nashville Chew Crew.
Awesome. Thank you so much for filling in for the folks who maybe joined us just a tad bit late. And thank you for everyone for listening to it again, but it's a great story. So this was a question that just came in, and you kind of touched on it, but I just wanted to give you a chance to speak a little bit more to it. Would you still consider a residential project or not at all? Let's say someone, money's no object, they want them there.
I know. I wish I could clone myself and my dog and my employee Steve. There's just not enough time in a day and not enough time in the year to where we can get to everybody. We've got too many people that want it. So I don't know how to answer that question. I got to keep Metro Water happy first. I got to keep Metro Waters and Metro Parks happy. But if there is time, and as the business continues to grow, as we perhaps maybe get more bipeds and more border collies, we'll get more residential jobs to be part of the program. But that's all I can say for now.
Hey, that's a great answer. You can only say what you could say. So let's go back up to some of the first questions that we were getting. So Sophia was asking, do you only serve Davidson County? And is that kind of your region that you're only doing?
It is. And because it's, I could go farther and maybe someday I will, but right now I'm very strict on having a less than an hour emergency response call. So we're on call 24/7. So if I get a call at 2 a.m., I'm there before 3 a.m. or 12 noon, I'm there before 1. So once you get out of that, especially the way Nashville traffic's working, I'm more hesitant to take jobs farther out of the city. But there's plenty of work inside Davidson County. So it's okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you did talk about this a little bit, but are there certain landscapes that aren't safe or effective to use the sheep? So you mentioned kind of the opposite, like there are places that are not safe to use lawnmowers and whatnot. Are there places where it's not safe to use the sheep?
I'd take my sheep anywhere, really. The only thing that sheep don't like is water. They're like hydrophobic. So they hate like a swamp. I couldn't enclose a swamp and then expect my sheep to do a good job for the client and for my sheep to succeed, have a good time. But no, there's not many places it's my job to make sure there's no poisonous plants. And around here, it'd really be more in a residential setting where you have an overgrown backyard with grandma's old, rhododendron or azalea. Anything in that family, the rhododendron family, is toxic to sheep. So it'd be my job to fence that off so they can't eat it. But even then, sheep, they're smart. They're smarter than we give them credit for. They won't eat something poisonous unless you leave them on a property way too long. when they're forced to eat it. So again, that's kind of on me to make sure I achieve the task at hand, but not starve my sheep and, put them at risk. So, um, besides like predators, like neighborhood dogs, but again, that's always why I have electric fence and livestock guardian dogs. There's areas I'm more worried, I have a harder time falling asleep at night than others, but no, I mean, I'll go anywhere. These sheep will go anywhere. Short answer.
Great. I love that. That's wonderful. And I like that you have to be mindful of where you're putting them for the poisonous aspects. So you do more than just drive the bus. You have to look around and make sure it's safe.
A little bit.
And so for your dogs, it sounds like you have a couple of different ones that are actually kind of doing that protecting, and then you have just Dougie right now as your herding dog. Do you have backup dogs in training, or what's the succession plan there?
No, good question. Right now we've got another border collie. Steve is my right hand man. That's a human, Steve. He's my right hand man. The only other human being on the Chew Crew payroll. I gifted him Dougie's son. It was a pick of a litter that he had recently, about 2 or 3 years ago. And so that dog's name is Frank. So Steve owns Frank, or Steve is the human being for Frank. And that's the kind of dog up in the up and coming future of the Chew Crew. But Dougie's getting up there too. So we're looking at getting a female and maybe breeding again. In terms of the guard dogs, I've bred a couple of times. So right now there's Sturgill, Dolly, and Dwight. So we have 3 guard dogs. We lost Reba this year, had to say goodbye to her of old age, but guard dogs, it's not easy to find either one of those. Good guard dogs and good border collies are not just something you pick up at the store. So it's going to take some time and some searching to find the right ones if we don't breed them ourselves. But even then, you still got to train. They don't come out of the womb ready to work. You got to kind of give them time and train them and get them used to the program. So that'll be a process.
Nice. Awesome. And so you kind of a similar question, you mentioned having all ewes, and then you said that they're pregnant. So do you have any males in your Chew Crew? And then Rachel mentions, or do you network with other herds?
I like that. I do have rams. So yeah, there's ewes and rams. And what I'll do is strategically place the rams in with the ewes around October. That's because a ewe's gestation period is about 5 months. And so I want those ewes to give birth in the spring. So before my season gets crazy, going into Metro Water properties or Metro Parks properties, and also not too early in the winter when it's cold. So it's got to hit that magic point right around March when grass is starting to grow again. There's no flies. That's when I try to time all my babies being born. So I'll put a ram in or several rams in, depending on how many females need to be bred in that group. In October, expect lambing in March. And then I can either castrate the ram lambs, and then they become what's called a wether, or so they would not be capable of breeding their sisters and mothers. Or what I can do is not castrate them, and that around 4 to 5 months of age, I can separate those males because they've kind of reached sexual maturity and you don't want to risk it. And I can make what I call a bachelor flock, and I'll just take all those young males and put them on a different job. So typically when you drive by the Chew Crew or you walk by the Chew Crew, all you're seeing is females, unless there's your young of the year, not sexually mature males in there, with them. And it's my job to remove them before, we have babies out of season.
Females getting that work done. Wonderful. Thanks so much. So I'm trying to get like some semblance of an organization of these questions. So I apologize for jumping
No, you're
around.
Good. Fire away.
Just kind of staying on the animals. Betty was asking, what breed are the guard dogs? I'm not sure if you mentioned that.
Great question. Great question. The breed that I have right now is called an Anatolian Shepherd, from Anatolia or Turkey, that part of the world. Some people call them Kangal or Akbash, but they're pretty much the same thing, just different phenotypic difference. I've also used Great Pyrenees. Those are from Pyrenees Mountains, France, Spain. The coolest one I've had, and one I need to get again soon, is the Central Asian Shepherd. And that comes from more like Georgia and Uzbekistan, those countries, that part of the world. Those are super cool dogs. There's just minor differences in each one. For example, the Great Pyrenees, the big fluffy ones that you kind of see around, it's tough to find a good one because they were brought over in the 70s and they're no longer a working dog. You know, they haven't been bred for that. So it is what it is. But typically they roam. They'll bark a lot, and then they'll check the perimeters at night. And they're classic for kind of pushing the boundaries of that perimeter and, you know, getting on your neighbor's property. So for me, that's not what I want, right? I don't want a dog. I want a dog that stays in the fence. So the Anatolian Shepherds tend to stay with their flock. They're much more flock oriented than these other breeds. So they're great. They also have less hair, like Great Pyrenees are big and fluffy and tons of hair, which is a pain in the butt to keep up with and gets caught up in burrs and, briars. The Anatolians are a much smoother coat, although it's a double coat. So they're super warm in the winter, but it's not too hard on them in the summer. So they're a good candidate for Tennessee climate. The Central Asian Shepherds are kind of like the best of both worlds. They are incredible dogs. They're huge, but they're so gentle. They're so good with humans. But where they come from, they're used to protect against wolves and bears, and so they come like docked. They come without ears and without a tail. So it's three less things for a wolf to grab onto. Like, that's how serious these dogs are. I've had a couple, and I bred one, but I that's another dog I really want to get as part of my pack again soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And that kind of the last point that you made about kind of the dogs being okay with humans kind of segues into a couple of questions that we got from Ed and John about, one, Ed was wondering, are there regular gigs that we can put on our calendars and sometimes go watch? But then so let's hear about that. And then he was asking about like children, and we had some other questions about, other folks in the community that might kind of run into your flock or into your dogs. Is there anything that we should know about that? And how do you kind of deal with that situation? Great question.
So I don't want to forget any of those questions.
Calendar to watch, how they interact.
Okay, yeah, I'll start from the back. So first of all, I would never put a guard dog on the job in the city that wasn't ready for it. So if they were, if they were too aggressive or too loud or too obnoxious, they just wouldn't be a part of my team. So the only dogs I bring in, I'm comfortable bringing to the city. And none of my dogs are going to be dog aggressive. They're just going to be protective of their sheep. So, and again, I'd give $1 million to know how these dogs can analyze what's a threat and what's not a threat, and how they communicate to, Joe with his German Shepherd on a leash, what they're telling that dog, because they're telling that dog something, and that dog is not coming near that fence. I don't know how they say it or what they're saying, but it's really, really impressive. So we always, where we go, put up signage. We always say, Nashville Chew Crew, targeted grazing in progress, with a number on it in case you see something crazy that needs to be, to my attention. Then we'll also have livestock guardian dogs on duty, just so everybody is aware, keep your dogs leashed. And then all over the fence, we'll have caution electric fencing, like big yellow signs. So very quickly, if you approach one of our sites, something's going on and you're aware of the scenario. Again, if your dog, the worst thing that can happen is your dog gets shocked. That's why I always keep your dog on a leash. But never have I had an issue with my dogs coming out of a fence. That's not what they want to do. They want to just stay between whatever perceived threat they have and their flock. Okay, so that was that question. Where can you watch the sheep? I guess I should round that question out with, don't worry about the dogs. If they bark at you, they're going to bark at you, that they're just doing their job. They're all business. Don't try to pet them. Don't try to make them love you, because they never will. Like, I'm literally the only person that can touch them. So don't try. Don't think you will be able to. Just, they're working dogs. Let them work. Don't be offended if they bark at you, but they probably will. If you want to see them, they're on Fort Negley and the Cumberland River Greenway pretty much every single day from, let's just say, Earth Day, April 20 something, until the week before Thanksgiving, every day. So come find us. You can't miss us.
Pretty easy. Mark your calendar every day.
Just highlight it all.
Yeah, just the entire calendar. So these next maybe 3 questions are going to be a little bit more on we talked a lot about the pros, and some of these get into maybe some of the perceived cons of this work. So we have John, who is saying that he really admires your work along the Cumberland River Greenway in Metro Center. And he said that he remembered the goats in the beginning and the transition to sheep later as discussed. And he's under the assumption that goats will eat most anything. Did you see a drop off when switching to all sheep later? Meaning you couldn't manage certain plants.
Great question.
Because you switched.
Great question. So goats and sheep will eat the exact same thing. And a lot of it is how long we keep them in that area. I will give it to John that goats might want to climb a little bit more. Like they'll get off their front legs and put them on a branch and lean up. So you might get 6 inches to 12 inches more per animal on height. Having said that, my sheep will climb up too. So I've worked with goats, and I worked with a gentleman that used to work with goats. Neither of us will ever use a goat again. They do the same thing. Goats are just much tougher to keep in an enclosure, and sheep are much easier to round up with a border collie. There's a saying that goats look up and sheep look down. Believe me, the sheep that I have been thriving and breeding and raising young, beautiful lambs on nothing but an urban palette of invasives and what we have in the city, both here and in Atlanta, and they eat the same thing. So it's more about trying to get your animals trained to a system to eat and thrive off those things. Because, and I'll say, if you were to take a goat or a sheep from a farm that was and their objective was to raise, let's say, meat goats or meat sheep, those sheep are out on pasture, those goats are out on pasture, and they're fed a commercial diet. If you were to take those goats and those sheep and put them in my system, they would wither away and die within months. And I'm not joking. So what I've done is I've got the best animals and then bred them to do what we need them to do in this context, regardless of the vegetation. So at that point, goats and sheep are the same. And so then you got to think about the other things that make sheep better than goats for me. So that's why I use sheep.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so we're sticking with a little bit of the cons. We had 2 questions too about the feces of the sheep, and if that is a problem in any way. So John was
great question.
Yeah, John was talking about the feces of the sheep and relative to the possible concern for contamination of soil, water, runoff into the Cumberland River. And then there was another kind of similar question from Ed, who was talking about sheep's reputation of being odorous, and any problems with lingering smells, how long their fertilizer is an issue there. And he was mentioning people's shoes, but I think we've covered that people aren't really like traipsing around in the areas that you're working in. But yeah, if you could talk about the feces problem or maybe.
No, sure. No, sure. No, it's great. So where to start? If I'm doing my job right and I'm moving the sheep constantly, because I don't want my sheep to stay on the same piece of property for too long. I want them to eat everything and then move them to the next one. That's not only to accomplish the landscaping goal, but also to keep them healthy, because the biggest concern in sheep is internal parasites, both sheep and goats. That's every shepherd or goat herd's worst nightmare in the Southeast is worms, specifically barber pole worm. It's getting more in depth than you want to know, but the way you can avoid that is either most people around here just keep their sheep and goats on the same piece of land and then deworm them, like stick something down their throat, drench it, and it's supposed to kill all the worms in their stomach. I don't do that. I've not dewormed a sheep in years because I've bred for it and culled for it, but also my management system is such that I move the sheep often enough to where the life cycle of that parasite doesn't have time to hit the ground, crawl up a blade of grass, and then be consumed by a sheep and enter the sheep system, right? So again, that gets back to stink. I'm never leaving my sheep in the same area for too long, so it should not smell. Now, I probably smell like a sheep and sheep poop right now, and I just don't smell it because I'm a shepherd. I get it if you might walk by and smell sheep, but it's never lingering. I don't find the smell, again, I'm biased, but I don't find it like oppressive or disgusting or nauseating, and it goes away quickly. It's very earthy. It's not like a chicken house where it's very ureic and nitrogen rich. It's just little pellets. Okay, and then back to the water part. I'm not a scientist, I'm just a shepherd, but because they're herbivores, I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm just going to say something about E. coli and how carnivorous diseases can be transmitted through feces, like dog food, etc., or humans. But I'll just stick away from that for a second. I'll just forget I even mentioned that and say that back to, because they're so hydrophobic and they don't want to go in any waterways, they're very, very rarely defecating by a low-lying area. They're usually sticking to high ground. That's what their hooves and naturally want. If their hooves get too wet, they can have problems. We'll just put it that way, bacteria or growth wise. So they know that they want to stay away from water. So back when I was in college at the University of Georgia, we did run water quality samples on that test site, and there was negligible, like we're talking little to no fecal matter from the goats at that point. Well, there were sheep and goats at one point. Either way, bottom line is from that research, I have zero concern about sheep fecal matter entering our waterways. But I'm happy to, someone wants to, send a grad student to do a test again, we can do it again. It's fine.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Jen, I know it's one. I don't know if you want to give your little spiel. We have about maybe 3 or 4 questions left.
Yeah, good call. I will also just throw out there too that Metro Water Services, of course, does a ton of testing throughout the Cumberland River for any kind of contaminants that are going into the river. So I know there's a lot of testing that is still currently being going on. And for our next session, so we are rounding out the first year of Sustainable in the City. Next week, we are doubling up again to avoid our holidays, but next week it is just going to be Christina, myself, and we are going to talk sustainable holidays. So this is going to be an opportunity to really go in depth on how you can be less wasteful and be more sustainable during your holiday season, whatever that holiday might be, from feasting to gathering to gifting. We're going to share all kinds of stuff, and then get your questions answered about being more sustainable during the holidays and how you can do that. So we will be sharing that next week. So that's next Wednesday, December 15th. We will send out a link to register to that as well. So join us next Wednesday for another episode and to finish up our 2021 season of Sustainable in the City. And with that, we will jump in to our last questions.
Yes. Everyone who's still on, stick around. We got some good ones still. Real quick, we have a couple of kind of more logistic questions. What about the sheep in a previously herbicide or pesticide treated area? Is there any issues with that?
Great question. I'm very aware of that, and I always ask that. I've actually turned down jobs where, they called the mosquito guy the day before and he sprayed everything with some nasty chemicals. So obviously those situations where we avoid. However, if it's like the year before, I'm not worried about it. All these chemical or herbicide labels have a withdrawal period just for livestock, because a lot of these farmers are using it on their pastures and their croplands. So if I know that it has been applied, I will go back and make sure that we meet that withdrawal period and then some. It also helps that my sheep aren't, again, being consumed for meat. That's what that withdrawal period was even designed for, so that those cows don't eat it and then you eat it because you ate the cow. My sheep are not being eaten, so it's okay. I mean, it's not okay. I'm still very wary of it, but you get the point.
Yeah, lessen the biomagnification problem.
Bingo.
How close to the ground do sheep eat? Is it possible to create erosion with a loss of brown cover, or is enough cover and root structure still there to prevent new erosion?
Great question. If you leave a sheep on a piece of property for too long, yeah, they'll take it down to dirt. Mm-hmm. Same thing with a cow, same thing with a goat, same thing with a donkey, same thing with a llama. That's my job to not let that happen. I want to accomplish the task, get every single bit of that green vegetative growth from the targeted species that I can, not starve my animals, and then get out of there. And for these sites that we come back 2 or 3 times a year, we can eat it all the way, not all the way to the ground, but put the herd on it, and knowing that we'll come back in 45 to 90 days and do the exact same thing. And then again, maybe even 45 days, 90 days down the road in the same growing season. So, and there's a difference. There's a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture these days, or rotational grazing as a part of that. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is kind of like that. It's very similar, but there's a couple of key differences in that my goal as a targeted grazer is to put the hurt on these plants that need to disappear, right? So if you've got honeysuckle and privet, you don't want me taking the top third and leaving the bottom 2/3 to grow more, like you would be in a regenerative agriculture pasture land setting. Sure, like right now when my sheep are on pasture and I'm trying to grow just grass and feed sheep and manage my land for future grazing, yeah, I'm not going to take it down to the ground. But if I get to an area where it's just Johnson grass or just, euonymus or just privet, yeah, I'll leave them on an extra day and make sure they eat every last bit of it, so that in the next year, that plant will be weakened, and then the year after will be weakened, and eventually we'll eliminate those plants and good things can start to grow. So that's, there's no easy way to answer that question. It's just every situation is different, and that's something, every site is managed a little bit differently.
Yeah. The name of the game is nuance.
Yeah.
Nuance. So we have 2 more lovely questions. So Allie asked, do you host apprenticeships? Asking for a friend.
We don't.
Allie does not want to have an apprenticeship.
Yeah. Allie's like, no, this sounds terrible. No, we don't host apprenticeships, but if someone wanted to work hard enough, they could reach out and we'd figure something out, but we don't do apprenticeships.
Yes, that makes sense. If it's another Zach Richardson who's ready to
if there's someone out there crazy enough to want to do this and then I'll give them a shot. But
yeah, give them a call. All right.
Just try. Yeah. Send me an email.
I love it. And then our last question is from Stacy. So she said, my daughter and I love seeing the Chew Crew when we're out and about, and she even took extra walks at Fort Negley a couple of months ago just to see them working. Do you have any Chew Crew merch? They have a fan club.
Well, thank you very much for seeing the sheep. That makes my day to hear that. That's awesome. I don't have any, but I've heard that request before, so maybe I need to get on that. And or maybe next time I see, was it Stacy? Is that who it was?
Yep.
Yeah, next time I see Stacy, we'll hook her up with some Chew Crew merch.
Nice. Yeah, we have Beverly in here who was the one who was looking for those whistles, and she also wants some merch. So you got some buyers.
Okay. Just missed Black Friday sale. So yeah.
There you go. As long as it's sustainably and ethically made.
You're right. out of wool,
Oh,
maybe.
yeah, exactly. Shear them and then do it. Yeah. Love it. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had from everyone. I hope I didn't miss any. I don't think I did. But this was fantastic. I don't know, Jen, if you have any other closing remarks or questions for our lovely Zach here.
No, just to say thank you so much for joining us, for talking to a computer screen, as different as that is for you, but we really appreciate it. I know we had a good audience today, and great questions from our audience. And just really appreciate you being here to talk about what you do and how you make Nashville more sustainable.
Happy to do it. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for all the great questions. Come see me, come see the sheep, come see Dougie, come get barked at by the guard dogs. Yeah, come find us.
Love it.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. I guess that's it. We will see. Hopefully, y'all will come back. Check us out next week for that Sustainable Holidays Spectacular. I sent a link in the chat, so hopefully some of you are registering, and we will see you here next Wednesday.
Wonderful.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.